My name's Ross Hansen. I currently serve as the Utah Lake Jordan River Regional Engineer. And my topic today is public water suppliers. I have to apologize because I think there's quite a few people here that have seen this presentation. I just about 2 months ago got invited down to the Utah Conference, or Utah Association of City Engineers, and gave this same presentation down there. Some of you saw it down there. Some of you have seen it in this setting as well. However, I was talking to Wes this morning, and he pointed out that it's actually better the second time because the concepts and principles and things start sinking in a little deeper. Hopefully that'll be the case. If you've seen the presentation, maybe your questions are going to be a little deeper this time, maybe a little more difficult. That's why we got Boyd and Ken over there to not let me go too far astray here. So with that, again, if you've seen me do this before, I kind of like to do an interactive, kind of a dialogue, kind of ask questions as we're going type presentation. I'm not a big fan of holding off the questions until the end, because I think if you get stumped at the first of this, you're not going to get anything from that point forward. So please feel free to participate, ask questions. It's hard to manage the time when we do that, but what's most important to me is that you understand the concepts that we're talking about. I don't like public speaking. I'm not big into this, but I do acknowledge and fully believe that the more knowledge and information you guys walk out of here with, the easier my job becomes. And so I want you to learn and I want you to understand when you leave here. So make sure you ask your questions. Did you want to add anything?
No, I just have a mic ready.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please give him a chance to get around and get you the microphone. With that, let's get going. I just like to throw this out just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. I don't condone violence, but I swear sometimes the old way of handling water disputes was the better way of handling water disputes. Nowadays, instead of meeting up at the head gate, the farmers call their attorneys, and then their attorneys call me. And then we end up in a multi-year lawsuit. So sometimes I think this way was the best way. So anyway, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. Today we're going to talk about public water suppliers. Now, I need to start this off and get one thing real straight here so you don't get confused. We are not talking about public water systems as administered by the Department of Environmental Quality and the Division of Drinking Water. That's not what we're talking about today. We're not talking about sampling of wells, certification of wastewater treatment facilities, none of that. We're going to talk about public water suppliers, what that is, what the statute says it is, and we're going to talk about the water rights owned by public water suppliers and the special treatments that have been granted to public water supplier water rights by the legislature. That's what we're getting into. So don't get this confused with public water systems as administered by the Division of Drinking Water. We're gonna talk about 3 administrative functions of the state engineer: extensions, proofs, and we're gonna talk about non-use applications and forfeiture. And what I found that works pretty good is I'm gonna compare and contrast water rights that are owned by a public water supplier and water rights that are owned by just a regular Joe citizen. Okay, and how they're handled differently or treated differently because of legislation that has passed. Okay, let's see. Let me flash that up. I'm going to leave that one up for just a second while I talk, but I just want you to take a look at those acronyms and abbreviations that are there, because they're going to be in my slide. I'll try, as we get into the deeper slides, I'm going to try to shut up for a second and or maybe even just read right from the slide. I actually attended a presentation one time where the whole discussion was about multitasking. And one of the things I learned in that was that we all think we can multitask, but in reality about 2% of the population can truly multitask, and they can only do so on a limited basis. I, for one, don't like somebody talking while I'm trying to read those slides. So I'm just going to give you 3 seconds here to just take a look at those so that when you see them in my presentation, you're not too confused. Okay? All right. Real quick question. how many here work for, represent, or directly work for or give counsel to public water suppliers by show of hands? Keep them up just 1 second real quick. Interesting. Well, it's about 90% of you. So this will be very applicable to what you're doing in your daily jobs. For those of you that didn't raise your hands, I get this question: how do I become a public water supplier? And I only throw this up kind of for funny, kind of for comic, but you need to act like one. You need to serve water to the public, okay? But the bottom bullet is really what I'm trying to point out, and that is there is no application process, and we do not maintain some sort of list that says these guys are public water suppliers and these guys aren't. You don't have to submit an application to be a public water supplier. You are qualified as a public water supplier if you meet the statutory requirements. And I have to apologize for these next two slides. They are the statute that defines what entities qualify as public water suppliers. There are 4 of them, okay? And we're going to read them so that we are all on the same page. But in blue, it says, well, I'm going to start at the top. Supplies water directly or indirectly to the public for municipal, domestic, or industrial use, and is a public entity. A public entity would be what? Federal government, the state of Utah, an agency of the state of Utah, an agency of the federal government, political subdivisions of the state of Utah, or counties, cities, so forth. That's what we're talking about there. A water corporation is another entity that can qualify as a public water supplier for these special treatments that we're going to talk about. A water corporation can be a for-profit corporation, but as it says there in B, it has to be regulated by the Public Service Commission. Okay, but a water corporation can qualify as a public water supplier. C is a little longer, and it's got 4 qualifiers to it, but it's a community water system. And let's read those qualifiers on that one. It says a community water system that supplies water to at least 100 service connections. By the way, Eric yesterday said he would clear his throat when there's a test question that's coming up. I'll just tell you, there's a test question coming up on this one. So a public water or community water system can qualify to be a public water supplier if it supplies water to at least 100 service connections or regularly serves at least 200 year-round residents. Keep continuing that to the next page of the statutes. Again, there's only 2 pages of these, and then we'll move on to some interesting stuff. In that community water system, the voting members have to own a share in the community water system and receive water from the community water system in proportion to the member's share in the community water system and pay the rate set by the community water system based on the water the member receives. Okay? So then we got the first 3, and the 4th entity that can qualify as a public water supplier according to the statute is a water users association. This one does not affect a whole lot of people. There's less than a handful of these that this affects, and an example of one of them would be the Provo River Water Users Association. Okay, but it says in which one or more public entities own at least 70% of the outstanding shares, and that is a local sponsor of a water project constructed by the United States Bureau of Reclamation. Again, that does not impact a whole lot of people, but nonetheless, there are some entities out there that qualify as a public water supplier under that rule there. Okay, that's it for the statute. Now let's get into some interesting stuff. Okay, so the reason I've kind of constructed this presentation in the way that I have is because I try to address some of the questions that I as a regional engineer get, and the way I see it, if we can kind of talk about some of those questions and you walk out of here knowing the answers to them, then I won't get the question again. So that's a good thing. So we're going to talk about extensions of time, and we're going to compare and contrast extensions of time that are being requested by a public water supplier on its water rights and a a non-public water supplier, I'm going to say Joe citizen, wanting an extension of time. Now, so that we're all on the same page, we're talking about extensions of time. So let's all get together here in our thinking. So we're talking about a situation where an entity or someone, an individual, has come into our office and has received an approval of an application. Okay? They've asked for a change application, an application to appropriate, an exchange, and the state engineer has granted that application. He's approved it. Okay? That entity or that person is now out in the wild. He is now trying to place that water to beneficial use. He's trying to develop the water right. Okay? We have given him in our approval, we usually give him a period of time, like 4 or 5 years, and this person or entity is out there trying to put this water to use. He hasn't, or he or the entity has not been able to do so. He's at the end of the 5-year period, and he is now requesting our office to give him more time to construct the works, to develop the water right. Okay? That's what we're talking about right now. It's been approved, some time has passed, and now they're asking for more time. Okay? If you are Joe Public, when you ask for that extension of time, you have to show our office that you have been diligent, and or you have to show that you have reasonable cause for delay. That's a pretty broad standard, but that's what you have to show us in order for us to grant that extension of time. If you are Joe Public, we cannot grant an extension of time on an application beyond 50 years. Now, let's talk about the special treatment that public water suppliers get in this regard. First and foremost, a public water supplier can receive an extension of time on an application that's been approved by the state engineer beyond 50 years. You can get that if you're a public water supplier. Okay, and just for clarification, I want to go, I need to make sure I say this very clearly. There's no extension of time for a Joe Public person and his water right beyond 50 years to complete works. Okay, if he has completed all the works and it comes in and asks for an extension of time to submit proof, that may be granted.
What if the project expands? So you do so much of the project and then you decide you want to add more onto the project. Would that be a new application and a new extension?
And thank you for the question. If I'm hearing that correctly, I'm going to put it in terms of irrigation, okay? I'm going to say you come into our office and you ask us for an application to appropriate for 40 acres of irrigation. And you go out and you look at your ground and you start working it and you start thinking, hey, I can actually get, before I get over to that creek and that tree line, I can get 60 acres of irrigation. Can you submit proof on 60 acres of irrigation and not 40? No, the answer is no. You would need to get another application into our office to be able to expand that acreage, if that's what you meant. Is that what you were asking?
Actually later. I didn't expect it to be 40. Just do have to do a different application to expand.
Okay, so maybe you're asking, okay,
Just exactly what you said. I'm clear.
Okay, you're clear. Okay, got it. All right, so thank you for the question. Keep those coming. Let's make sure everybody understands what we're talking about here. So, if a city would like to get an extension of time beyond 50 years, a public water supplier would like to get an extension of time beyond 50 years, the statute says that that public water supplier needs to submit with the extension of time request what's called a 40-year plan. By show of hands, who has submitted a 40-year plan? Wow, not very many in this. There's a couple. Okay, there's a couple. 3 or 4. All right, good. I'm guessing that if you represent or work with a public water supplier, at some point in your career, you're going to be asked to prepare a 40-year plan. I get lots of questions in regards to 40-year plans, okay? So we're going to talk about them. A 40-year plan shows the future 40-year demand for water by showing projected population growth, by showing the works that have already been constructed and the expenditures that have occurred, that shows, that tabulates the already certificated water rights. It is important for you to walk out of here with this knowledge. A 40-year plan is dynamic and constantly changing, and a 40-year plan has to be water right specific. So you should never prepare a 40-year plan and have that in your filing cabinet, and every time you need an extension request beyond 50 years, pull that out, copy it, and send it to our office. That's not going to work. Now, let me share a story with you, a real life story. Do you have a question?
What if the water right is a member of a multi-group change application? Would you still have to have that be water right specific, or could you have it be change specific? Does that make sense?
It is, and I would say that it needs to be water right specific, but you could include all the water rights in one change and say why you need this one, why you need this one, why you need this one. Okay? Good question, though. So let me give you a story of something that happened with a city. I'm not going to tell you what the city is or what the city's name was, and I'm going to round the numbers for ease of conversation here. Okay? You do have a test question that's similar to this. But I received a 40-year plan, this is a real life story, from a city, very well done 40-year plan. They'd gone in there and they had calculated up all their certificated water use, or certificated water rights, all of their paper water rights, and they calculated them up and they said, in our portfolio of water rights, we have certificated 20,000 acre feet of water. Okay? Then they went through in this beautiful 40-year plan and they figured out exactly what their population growth was anticipated in the next 40 years. And they came in and they said, now remember, they said they had certificated 20,000 acre feet of water. And then after doing their calculations and figuring out what their population is going to look like in 40 years, they said, we're going to need, at the end of the 40-year period, 18,000 acre feet of water. Okay, hopefully I'm starting to see some weird looks, okay?
More, or they don't need the 20?
Their total need in 40 years, good question, thank you. Total need in 40 years is 18,000 acre feet. But over here in their report, in their 40-year plan, they showed me that they already had certificated 20,000 acre feet of water. We're going to talk about how that happens, but more importantly is you should be asking yourself the question, I don't get that. What, they just showed that they have more water than they're going to need in 40 years. Now remember, you submit a 40-year plan with an extension request. You're asking the state engineer to extend a water right beyond 50 years because you need it for the future use of the public. But this city said, we already have 20,000 acre feet of certificated water, and in 40 years we're going to only need 18, but will you extend our water right, this other water right that we're working with? That doesn't make any sense. So I sent that back to them, and I said, I think you need to relook at your numbers. I think you need to rethink this. Because I can't recommend to the state engineer that we approve an extension of time on another water right when you already have in your portfolio more water right than you're showing that you're going to need. Does anybody have any questions on that? Is that making sense? That's a true story. Okay, so go ahead.
Couldn't they just lease out that extra 2,000?
Okay, good question. Do I have any thoughts on that? Lease out the extra 2,000. Give him the mic right there, James.
Most cities cannot lease out their water right.
Lease or sell, right? It's in the chapter, what is it, 6, Kent, of the Constitution that says, Title 6, I think, of the Constitution says the city cannot lease or sell its water rights. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I know, because I know the organization we work for, we have a contract in place where we will sell water from irrigation shares that we own, but it's specifically listed that this is not a lease. It is not. We're not selling you the actual share. We're only authorizing you to use water from it.
Interesting. What city are you with? Nibley. Okay. Interesting. Thank you for the comments. Any others? There's one, James.
So what if the city shrinks in size?
Good question. Never had that one asked before. What if a city shrinks in size? I think you're starting to get into a really deep concept of, let's just think about that for a second. If the city had use of 20,000 acre feet of water, and they had paper water rights for 20,000 acre feet of water, and then their need for water goes way down, let's say down to 11,000 acre feet of water, I think you're starting to get into a scenario where you have to ask the question, why do you need an extension of time on other water rights if you can't show that you have a future requirement for the public? So I don't think if, in that scenario, if you were to submit an extension request to us, I don't think you'd be getting an approval from us on that extension, because you're actually showing decreased demand. Go ahead.
So are they going to be forced to sell their water rights if they don't need them?
Can't sell them, right, because of the Constitution. And will they be forced if they don't need them? It's a good question. I don't know where that's all going to go. Perhaps those water rights would lapse. Perhaps those water rights would expire. Okay? Perhaps. Getting into some philosophical things, but that's okay. It's good. They're good questions. Did anybody else have one? Okay.
You don't have to use the full amount of the water right at any given year to keep it current. You could use portions of each water right, it seems like.
Good question, and let's talk about that. Let's talk about it in terms of a Joe Public farmer, rancher, okay? Remember that yesterday you heard this a lot. Beneficial use is the limit and the measure of a water right. But can you envision a rancher that has a 40-acre field out behind his house that he's irrigating an alfalfa crop on, and the rancher is holding 2, 3, 4 water rights for 40 acres of alfalfa, and he tells the state engineer, this year I'm using, for that same 40-acre field, I'm using water right A. Next year, I'm going to use water right B. Next year, I'm going to use water right C. That doesn't make any sense, does it? To me, it doesn't. You can't rotate water rights. You can rotate crops. You can't rotate water rights. You can't say I'm using this one this year, and next year I'm using this one, and next year I'm using this one, all on the same field. I don't think that's going to fly. Does anybody want to chime in on that? I think we're good. Go ahead. Looks like we're getting some questions now.
But I think you guys have said to certificate it, you can look at your max year. So if you have a 10-year period and your max year during a drought in year 5 was 2,000 acre feet, it's okay if some years you're using only 1,000. You can prove up to your max year. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have defined a time frame, but you know.
No. Good comment, good question, good thought. Yes, if a city, I think here's a simple response to that. When submitting proof on a water right, you probably want to use your max year, not your low years. I think that's kind of a response to what you're saying there. Okay, let's keep going. We are now going to get into the administrative function of non-use applications, and I put the big red word up there of forfeiture, which usually gets hairs on the back of the neck up and gets everybody all excited. So we're going to compare and contrast Joe Public water rights with city water rights, or municipal water rights, or public water supplier water rights is probably better said, in regard to non-use and forfeiture. Let me first make it very clear that forfeiture is a judicial action. The state engineer does not forfeit water rights, okay, in the change application process. Now, we might be getting into some semantics here if that's where this discussion goes, but we don't forfeit water rights. As it says up there, if a water right that's owned by a member of Joe Public, Joe citizen, doesn't use his water for a 7-year time period, that will be on your test, maybe not in this particular section, but that 7 years is going to get asked to you on your test. He is subject to forfeiture. Subject to forfeiture. Okay? In section 73, subsection 73.142E7, public water suppliers are exempt from this forfeiture issue. Now, there's some important dates, and they are on your exam. Okay? If a public water supplier owns a water right prior to May 5, 2008, the public water supplier acquired the water right prior to May 5, 2008, the state engineer is not going to go back and look at non-use of that water right if you submit a change application to our office. If, and this is very important, if a public water supplier acquires a water right after May 5th, 2008, that date is when the statute was implemented, and then you come into our office and file for a change application. So just to get us all on the same page, farmer decides he's done growing alfalfa and would like to grow houses on his property, and the city works a deal with him to develop the property, and the farmer, as a part of that development agreement, has to turn in his water rights. Okay? The city then that would be an agricultural water right. The city would then need to bring that in and be able to use that in their municipal system, would need to file a change application. Correct? If that happens, if that acquiring of that water right and then that subsequent change application comes in after May 5, 2008, the state engineer is going to review that change application to see if the water right has been being used the past 7 years, or if there's an excuse to not having used the water in the last 7 years. Does that get anybody gander up? We're all on the same page on that one. Okay, go ahead. Here, wait, let's get the mic. Right here.
Thanks. So a city acquires some shares from an irrigation company. Do they have to do a change application right away, or can they sit on those shares for, and maybe this is what you're talking about, how long can they sit on those shares before they make a change application?
That is a beautiful question. You're going to think I paid him to ask that question. I didn't, I promise. Great question. Let's talk about it. So a city gets this water right that I just kind of threw out there. The farmer stopped irrigating, stopped growing alfalfa, and starts growing homes. And this is so critical for you guys that work with public water suppliers. If you don't immediately send a change application into our office, how will you ever know if there is a problem with prior non-use and potential forfeiture of that water right? You can sit on it if you want, but I'm not legal counsel, but if I could give you one piece of advice that's kind of legal counsel, but I'm not a lawyer, I would recommend that in any exchange or acquisition of a water right into a city, that you condition that buy or acquisition on the change application being approved by the state engineer's office. If you walk out of here with that knowledge right there, you guys are going to be better helpers to your public water supplier. Okay, so in your question, if you acquire the water right and then sit on it for years, And then, say, 6 years later, you kind of sit down and start doing your homework and figuring out your water rights, and you file a change application to our office. What if at that time the state engineer is looking at it and he's going, well, dang, that farmer wasn't even using that water for the last 25 years. It's going to be very difficult for our office to approve that change application, and here you are 6 years down the road thinking everything's okay with that water right. Did that help?
Ross, could I add to that?
Yes, please.
If you happen to buy it and hold it for 7 years, you caused the problem because you never filed the change application.
I agree. But let's qualify that. May 5, 2008. If they've had it before May 5, 2008, then what Boyd is saying is not applicable. After May 5, 2008, it is very applicable.
I have a question. How does that apply to like shares in a company? So if a subdivider develops and he provides the city with shares, so not a water right, but the shares, what then does the city, what is the city's obligation then?
Same concept. Same concept. I know that you guys had a presentation yesterday on shares and water rights, and it kind of went off the rails a little bit, but it's the same concept. The water needs to be being used, whether it's shares or water rights. Do you want to add something to that, Boyd?
Well, I was just going to add that the forfeiture statute talks about a water company can lose water rights and then based on forfeiture, and the loss will be allocated to the shareholders. They can allocate to the shareholders that weren't using the water. So if you acquire shares, you don't use them, they're not protected just because you're a city if you haven't filed a change application on them.
Exactly. Go ahead.
What if you have a secondary system and they build houses on there, but 3/4 of the land is still irrigated and you're using a secondary system and taking those same shares and putting it back on the same property?
Okay, so let's make sure we understand. So farmer is irrigating this property right here in front of me, and now there's houses on it. Some of it. And there's grass around the houses. And the water is now being used for the grass around the houses.
Yes.
Okay, where is the water coming from? Is it coming, in your example, is the water coming from the city's new wells?
No, it's coming from the same canal.
Same place. If it was used for irrigation in the past and is being used for irrigation now from the same points of diversion, I don't think you need a change application on it. That's a rare situation, by the way. Very rare, but it's possible. And also, just to keep that in perspective, we just went from this whole area that was irrigated down to a lot less irrigation because of the houses, the asphalt, the concrete, the driveways, right? So there's kind of a weird thing going on there. Got to be careful.
Ross, I was just say there is a presentation on non-use and forfeiture next.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Don't
That's
get
correct.
Too.
Go ahead.
So quick question on timing issue. A farmer has a 40-acre parcel, and he does the whole deal with the city, but he's going to parcel off 20 to begin with, start building there, still farm the other side, but he needs to get all this water transferred to the city. Anyway, there's some timing issues there, and he's going to continue to farm this for maybe the next 10 years until this gets built out.
Okay. I don't have a problem with that. Was there a question in there?
So the question is if he wants to transfer all, the deal was 40 acres to the city, they're annexing it in. So they need all the water, but they're gonna let him continue to farm until he sells those other properties.
Very possible, very doable.
So they own the water, but you still use it through the irrigation company, and is it the same change order?
If the water is yes. If the water is currently being diverted from its historic point of diversion and at its historic place of use, it's fine. But what about the part of the water right that's now being used in the city? It would need a change application on it, right? To be legal and correct. But the other part wouldn't. It is complicated. Go ahead.
I was just wondering on the irrigation question. if that share goes to the city and it's used for the same purpose, but now you have houses, is the city that owns that share or company in jeopardy of losing part of that share because it's now not all irrigated? Do they need to rent or?
Let's qualify that. Good question. Let's qualify it. So, let's make sure we're box this in. So, a city acquires a share from a developer. The city files and receives approval of a change application to use the water in its points of diversion and in its municipal system. Okay? Quantify the numbers. Let's say that we're talking about 1 acre foot of water. Okay? That 1 acre foot of water now becomes part of the city's portfolio, even though the land now has a house on it that may be using the city water inside the home and maybe using the city's secondary system on the outside of the home. Okay? They acquired 1 acre foot of water. Now that house may be using more or less than the 1 acre foot of water that that the city acquired. So, did that answer your question? Or if it didn't, ask, please. Hold on, let him get that mic, because these guys in St. George and Moab want to hear us.
Do they come to a point where they lose it? I mean, or are they exempt once they acquire it?
Good question, and I see where you're headed. So once it's into the city's hands, they've acquired it, and a change application has been approved, the city's now holding that water for the future requirements of the public. And so therefore, it's not going to get lost. But good question.
Hey, they've asked you in St. George, and you probably don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but they want to see some or hear about the background why this statute was adopted.
Ooh. Which one? Ask them. We need to type back to them or have them tell us which statute, what are they referring to? The non-use statute?
May 5th, probably.
The May 5th, 2008. Which statute are they referring to, I wonder?
Hopefully they'll respond fairly quickly.
Okay. Let's keep moving, and we may have to come back. That might be deeper than where we want to go right now. But did somebody else did you point at somebody? Okay. All right. So,
May
sorry, go ahead.
2008.
That was Nate down in. No, May 2008. Oh, that's what they asked. Why did it come about?
Can we have some background about why this statute was adopted, the May 2008?
I can explain it.
Yeah, please.
So what happened was this change to the forfeiture statute happened in the 2008 legislature. There was significant concern by public water suppliers because prior to that, they were subject to forfeiture just like everybody else. And many cities, just like you have explained with 40-year plans, knew that they had much more water than they had ever used. And so the statute was modified to protect the cities, but there was some concern that as they added to their portfolio, they needed to vet those water rights before they came under the protections of the statute. So that date was set as that criteria. If you already own the water right, it was going to be protected from forfeiture. If you acquired additional water rights after that, before they could be protected, they needed to go through the change application process.
And I think all of that is based in the concept that the cities were trying to get some protection for their water rights beyond 50 years. In the end, because a lot of cities were coming up against that timeline where they had water rights that weren't being used, had not been developed, and they were it had been 50 years since they'd been approved.
That actually happened about 2 years later.
2 years later, okay.
Another question, if a public water system is now supplying water, after 7 years, does the .45 for domestic use of the individual water right forfeit after 7 years? If yes, should the system transfer the domestic portion of each water right through a change application?
Okay, read that one more time, please.
If a public water system is now supplying water, after 7 years, does the .45 for domestic use of the individual water right forfeit after 7 years? If yes, should the system transfer the domestic portion of each water right through a change application?
I'm not sure I'm understanding that
We
question.
may have to have this individual contact you directly.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm understanding that question. Tell them they can call Ross up here at the Division of Water Rights, and we'll talk about it, because I'm not sure I'm
You just
understanding
did.
what they did. Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the next administrative function, and this is proofing. Now, to get us on the same page with respect to proof. So, an application has been approved by the State Engineer's Office, and they asked for you, the public water supplier, or the Joe citizen has asked to be able to do something with that water. The state engineer approved that application, and now you've gone out and you've put the water to beneficial use, and you're ready to submit proof. I get tons of phone calls on this issue, so let's talk through this.
Ross,
Go
can I
ahead.
back you up just one before you do that?
Go ahead.
Because we were on extensions of time,
Uh-huh.
and you talked about extensions of time after 50 years, but you never talked about before 50 years, difference between normal people and public water
Okay,
suppliers.
what is it that you want to point out there?
That a public water supplier really doesn't have to do anything. Just holding the water right is due diligence for the first 50 years.
Okay, and I should have said that, and one of the reasons I kind of let it slip was because the next question I get when that statement is made is, well, then why do we need to submit extension requests? That's okay, let's talk about
Because
that.
it will lapse if you don't.
So why are we lapsing them if all they have to do is say, here, will you extend this?
Because we want to stay in touch
Okay.
and keep in contact.
And the reason, the best answer to that question I got is exactly what Boyd just said. There are some small cities out there whose mayor no longer is mayor, and his city address change, the address where the mail goes to changes, okay? And sometimes that correspondence, if we go too far out on extension requests, that correspondence gets lost, doesn't go to the right person, the city doesn't file the right paperwork, and their water rights lapse. And so that's one of the reasons we want you to continue to keep up on top of your water rights and filing extensions every so often. Okay, but like Boyd said, before the 50-year period ends, all the city has to do is say, we're holding this water for the future needs of our public, and most likely that application, that extension application is going to be granted.
Not most likely, it will.
Will be, okay. All right. Okay, let's go to proofs. So the applicant has now put the water to beneficial use, and he is now submitting his proof to receive from the state engineer the final certificate. That's what we're talking about here. Something that used to go on at the state engineer's office that has always perplexed me is there was a time when a city would realize that it needed more capacity in one of its wells and had to drill a new well. And so they would come into the state engineer's office and they would say, hey, we've found a good well site right here. And we would like an application to be able to drill the well, and we think we can put a 5 CFS pump in this well, and the well's going to be a really good producing well. And so we'd like an approval to do that. And the state engineer would give that approval to them. And out the door they'd go, and they'd go drill their hole, drill the well, and they would drop a nice pump down inside there, a 5 CFS pump, and they would submit proof to our office and say, hey, we drilled the well, and we've got a nice pump down inside there, and it will pump 5 CFS. That's kind of old school thinking. And the state engineer would issue a certificate to them for 5 CFS. Some of you in your public water suppliers may have water rights like this, okay? Current or present day thinking is, if you want to submit proof to our office, you would need to show that the water has been placed to beneficial use, even in the city. The difference between the city and the Joe public, or Joe citizen, is really that the Joe citizen, when he goes out and puts his water to beneficial use on a piece of property, he actually has to show us where it's at, what piece of ground is being irrigated, if you will, where's the house. In a city, you don't have to do that. You have to show us a service area. Okay, you have to tell us this water is being used within your service area. In other words, you don't have to go out and count your houses. You don't have to count your driveways and shrubs and each blade of grass. That's the difference between a proof on a Joe Public water right and a city water right. Okay? Now, the very last slide we're going to talk about, and it's on your test, is about the service area. So we're going to get into that in just 1 second. Okay, let's move on to that. Real quick, just want to see if we can get a little bit of comic relief here. Let's see if we can make this happen. This is just a video I like to watch and think it's pretty funny. So this is, I always joke and say this is kind of like a day in the life of the state engineer's office. I want you to watch the gal in the green shirt as they're playing this game of musical chairs here. See if this will work. Okay, just a little bit of comic relief. Sorry for that. Okay, so let's see if I can escape out of there and get back to my PowerPoint here. See if I can make this happen. Let's see, where are we here? Which one is it? That's not it. That's not it. That's got to be that one, huh? Okay. Let's see if we can make. What did I do wrong? All right. Okay. We're going to go through a proof example. I get lots of phone calls on proofs. The phone calls go something like this. A city calls me up and says, hey, Ross, we just acquired a new water right from a farmer. We've got a change application on it. It's approved. Should we submit proof? Or, what's the other option? Should we ask for an extension of time? And the answer to that question is it depends. And we're going to go through an example here to try and figure that out. There are some questions on your exam that are very similar to this, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this. We're going to look at it in the format of kind of a written story here, and then on the next slide I've got it on spreadsheet where we break down the numbers so we can all see what's going on, okay? But we're going to keep it simple. We're going to say that a city has 2 water rights, 2 paper water rights, and 2 wells. Okay? We're going to keep it as simple as we possibly can, but yet still get the point across. Okay, this city, with its paper water right, has the authorization to divert 4 CFS from one of its water rights and 5 CFS from its other water right, giving it the paper authorization to divert roughly 6,500 acre-feet of water. Okay? Again, you're going to get a question very similar to this. The 2 wells that the city have, they're great wells. They pump really well. They're great wells for the city. The capacity of those 2 wells is, well A has the capacity to pump 6 CFS, and well B has the capacity to pump 5 CFS. Okay? As part of this, the city is also reporting to our water use program, which I don't think you guys have had that presentation yet. It's coming. But the city is reporting to our water use program that they are diverting each year, roughly average, 2,000 acre-feet of water on average. Okay? The city acquires a new water right for 600 acre-feet, files a change application, gets approved, now is ready to submit proof, or thinks it's ready to submit proof, on that 600 acre-foot water right. Okay, so now just to, I'm going to ask a question here, but just to recap. The city has 2 water rights that allow it to divert 6,500 acre-feet, and it's reporting to our water use program that it is diverting 2,000 acre feet. Okay? So the question then becomes, how much water, how much of that 600 acre foot application can be perfected / certificated in that scenario? Throw me out some guesses. Go ahead. I got a 0. I got a 0. Anybody have any other thoughts?
They're only using 1/3 of what they have already. Yeah, they can't prove it.
Very good. Very good. When the city files the proof, what can be certificated? The answer is 0 acre feet. We're going to go to the next slide and look at it with numbers, okay? Just so everybody understands this. I get this question a lot. I can't tell you how many times I get called and said, hey, we need to proof up on this water right. Should we proof up on it or certificate? I was like, you got to give me more information. I don't have an answer for you. But this is the kind of thing you have to think through. If you walk out of here and understand this, then that phone call won't come anymore. So we all win, okay? So here it is, just broken down. Water right 1 was for 4 CFS, roughly 2,880 acre feet. Water right 2 was for 5 CFS, roughly 3,620. That totals to a total of 9 CFS and a total volume of 6,500 acre feet. The new water right would add another 600 acre feet of paper water to the city's portfolio, totaling 7,100 acre feet. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting, and here's where we've got to get rid of some confusion. If you'll notice, the capacities of the well will, if you pumped those wells 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you could pump from one of the wells 4,344 acre feet, and from the other one 3,620, which totals 7,964 acre feet, which is greater than 7,100 acre feet. And so you see in green, I said, well, that makes that part of the test is okay, right? We can pump more. We can pump more than we have in paper water, right? So maybe we could certificate more water. That's what a lot of cities are thinking, okay? But what I'm trying to drive home here is it's not what you pump, it's what you've placed to beneficial use. And how do we know what you placed to beneficial use? By what you're reporting to the water use program of what you're diverting. So lots of bells should be going off. Your mind should be going, okay. One of the questions that came up in my last presentation was, well, hey, that water use program's not accurate. Our data is not accurate in that water use program. Do you know how I answer that? You better get it accurate. You better work with the folks that are reporting that water use number to our office, because it affects the other end of this equation, which is whether or not you can proof up and get certificates for additional water rights. It's an important thing. Any questions or comments on that? Is it making sense? Go ahead.
My thinking was different from what you're saying. I can see how the cities would think what you're implying, that you're saying that they would think they could just keep pumping.
Mm-hmm.
But wouldn't that run into problems in the future because they drain the aquifer? Even if they were to show beneficial use, say the city's growing and they acquire more water rights, they keep pumping a greater capacity. Because if they obtain water rights from a farmer that's getting water that's a surface water right, and it's being, from a surface source, the aquifer is going to be, if you pump it harder and harder, it's just going to drain.
While your statement is correct that obviously we have to, and thank you, but we have to obviously be watching what the capacities of the aquifer is. The capacities of the aquifer are anyway. Anyway, if we've got to be watching the abilities of the aquifer to recover and whatnot. That's obvious, but I think this example is talking about a water righting situation where we're comparing paper water with actual diversions. Getting into whether or not the aquifer is overpumped is another day's topic, but certainly that is something we are watching out for or trying to look out for when we're approving these change applications, okay? Go ahead. Wait for the mic real quick.
So how does the city acquire that water for a future use then?
Okay, very good question. So we're talking about the moment of submitting proof here. And not to be confused, make sure everybody's on the same page. We're talking a water right that has already been acquired by the city, and it's time to, they're wondering if it's time to submit proof on that water right that they've acquired. My answer in this situation is no. You file, good, thank you. You just answered your own question. You file an extension request. What does the state engineer do with an extension request? Boyd just answered this for us. Approves it. Because you're telling us you're holding it for the future needs of the public. You're waiting for this number. I was going to point, but the guys in St. George wouldn't have seen it. You're waiting for this number to grow. So you're filing an extension request until this number gets above 7,100 acre feet.
And the city can hold it forever.
For the first 50 years?
Paid it for them.
Yeah, for the first 50 years, all they have to do is ask for an extension. After the 50 years, they have to come in and ask for an extension and accompany that with a 40-year plan. Correct? Go ahead. Here's one, James.
The previous slide refers to water rights proof. Would that change if a city owns shares rather than water rights? If they own shares in an irrigation company?
Great
would
question.
this whole formula or the whole process change?
Great question, and the answer simply is no. It's the same concept. Those shares of stock, as was tried to be explained yesterday, those shares of stock have file jackets created for them, and a change application should have been filed and should have been approved by the state engineer, and now it's time to submit proof, and you haven't been able to show that you've quite got that much water put to beneficial use yet, and so an extension of time is necessary. Okay? Is that making sense? Keep going.
So out of curiosity, do most irrigation companies' shares, have they been approved, or are most of them sitting out there with a change application but unapproved?
Tough question. It's totally dependent on where you're at in the state and which city. That's a tough question right there. Don't know that I could answer. I don't know if anybody could answer that question.
What if the irrigation company isn't a public water supplier? But you're, as a city, you own shares in it.
Okay,
that were
the
acquired
city's
with
the
purchase of
public
property.
water supplier, and the city has acquired, keyword, has acquired the shares.
It has no if they haven't acquired all the shares, just a portion of it, you're still not a majority shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do a change application on the portion of your shares to?
You betcha, and great question. You bet. You bet. City, I can't imagine, and I'll bet there's some people in this room that have acquired some shares into their city over time and are maybe waiting to file a change application on them. That kind of depends on your strategy and probably your legal counsel, but you certainly can file changes on shares as they're coming into your city to move them so that you can use them for municipal use out of the city's points of diversion. Go ahead. We're getting close on time, but we're close on slides too. I think I've only got one more slide.
Just for clarification, so the city's slowly acquiring shares from an irrigation company. Once they do submit that change application, they have to go through a proofing that the irrigation company has, those water shares have been used or put to beneficial use during the irrigation period or during the time that the irrigation company had those shares.
Yes.
They do. Okay. And that's what you just said is a tough one to answer.
Yes, it's tough, but yes, your answer is yes, and that's a great question. Okay, I'm going to move to that next slide. There is a question on the exam about public water supplier service areas. Get lots of questions on this. Questions go something like this. Hey, Ross, we just annexed a new piece of ground into our city, and we're going to build a subdivision on it, and we're going to supply the homes in that subdivision with water from our wells. Do we need a change application to expand our service area? And that's very important, okay? As you can see up there, a service area as thought about in the state statute is the geographic area wherein a public water supplier agrees to serve and can reasonably serve water. Number 2, area expands, the service area expands as the distribution system, i.e. the pipes, expand. No change application. Okay? And that's what that third one says. No change application is required if you're expanding your pipe network, your service area. That is different, very different from Joe Public or Joe Citizens water rights, right? But that is on your exam. There are questions about what a public service, or yeah, what the service area is for a public water supplier. Okay? Just to sum it all up now. I think I pulled this slide off of a presentation you did, Boyd. But this is, so why is this all important? It's important for you to understand that your water rights get special treatment if you're a public water supplier, and they get special treatment and they're treated differently when it comes to exemptions from forfeiture. Okay? You are treated differently when it comes to filing a change application and the state engineer looking at the water right for non-use. If you acquired it prior to May 5th, 2008, that's not an issue. But if it's acquired after May 5, 2008, the state engineer has to go back and look if the water has been being used. Simply holding a water right by a public water supplier for 50 years is reasonable due diligence. That's what the statute says you have to have, is reasonable due diligence. A public water supplier simply holding qualifies for that. Okay? We can grant an extension of time for a public water supplier's water right beyond 50 years. And what's that last one? Different proofing requirements. Okay, so just to make sure that last bullet is clear, Joe Public, when he proofs up on his water right, he has to show us exactly where the water's being used. Okay? When a public water supplier proofs up on his water right, he shows us a service area. You don't have to go counting houses and shrubs and trees and asphalt driveways, okay? You just show the service area. Tell us it's being used in the service area. Do you want to add something?
Yes, there is one thing that I don't think has been said yet.
Okay.
And that's on extensions after 50 years for a public water supplier. They actually fall into 2 categories.
Okay.
If you haven't constructed the works, the state engineer may approve that extension. If you have constructed the works and your 40-year plan shows that it's needed, then he must approve the extension, is the way the statute's written.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of my slides. Again, I work in the Utah Lake Jordan River Regional Office now. If you have specific questions you want to talk to me about, you're welcome to call me. We can talk through anything. There is a lot of confusion out there in regards to this, and I would love to help you get it straightened out if I can. Bart, do you have a question? Any new rule changes at the last legislative session? Boyd, that one's you. How do you want to respond to that?
Not on public water suppliers. There was significant discussion, and I expect this summer there'll be a number of issues studied about public water suppliers using water outside their boundary. But in the end, there was no legislation passed on that issue this last session.
Wait, don't take it off yet.
Okay, I got a mic. Who's just
Ross,
said
one
that?
more question for you, or clarification.
Okay.
Because I know a lot of the attendees are from public water systems as recognized by the Division of Drinking Water, which has a different definition than you gave earlier. So just clarification, a public water system with the Division of Drinking Water would be 15 connections, 25 population. For water rights, those numbers were what again?
100 connections, No, let's see, it's 100 service connections or 200 people.
And that is a test question. It's important to understand.
is.
And then one more. So a government agency such as the Bureau of Reclamation could be considered a public water supplier?
Yes. Yes, they can. Do you want me to go back to that slide, or is yes sufficient on that?
Probably sufficient.
Okay. Go ahead, one more question.
So if a public water supplier, so for the first time extension, they don't have to submit a 40-year plan, but for the second one, they do.
Very good question. Let's make sure you leave with that understanding. It's for the first 50 years, you don't need to submit a 40-year plan.
Restate the question, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, he didn't have a mic, did he? The question was, he said, if for a public water supplier, for the first extension, you don't need a 40-year plan, but for the second extension, do you need a 40-year plan? I think that's what you said, basically, isn't it? The answer is, we're talking, 40-year plans come into play after the initial 50-year period has gone by since approval. Okay? I personally am of the opinion that a quasi 40-year plan probably ought to come in, but that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to, but it'd be nice if you said, hey, this is why we're keeping the water for the future needs of the public. Here's how much we're anticipating. Something like that is helpful, but you don't have to. Okay? All right. Hopefully that helped a little bit. Again, feel free to give me a call, and we can work through specific issues, but thank you for your time.